So welcome back to our lecture series. I appreciate people coming out, especially during midterm week, which I know is a tough week. And I hope everyone has a good trip during midterms and that you come back with lots to share. So the Shanghai group, the Mexico City group, which we will be seeing. So you can't have fun until we leave on Monday morning. And then the group going to LA, which I'll also see. So we welcome Jürgen Meyer-H. to Rice. Jürgen Meyer's Master of Architecture thesis, which he did at Princeton, he studied previously at Stuttgart and the Cooper Union, was about boredom. I want you to think about that for a moment. And is anyone yawning yet? The door's over there if you want to slip out. Boredom. Think about that, right? Of course, boredom for Jürgen is anything but boring, and that's an important distinction. Jürgen is too busy to be bored, and has probably been that busy since he started studying architecture, actually probably well before then. And certainly since winning the competition in 1998 when he was only 33 for the Stadthaus in Scharnhauser Park, a former American military site outside Stuttgart. This town hall that combined municipal administration, civil services, a public library, gallery, classrooms, offices, sports facilities, and a wedding room, it is a city hall after all, remains one of my favorite of Jürgen's projects, this project so long ago. It's a complex but defined, taut but luxurious, smart but inviting small building. It also includes a rain curtain, which is a computer-animated artificial rain that drips from underneath the flat cantilevered roof, thereby sort of exacerbating any anxiety about cantilevered roofs, flat roofs, and rain to begin with. So constructed rain, and a light sculpture that consists of a hanging glass fiber cables, a series of hanging glass fiber cables that project points of light onto the ground, animated by the movement of the wind. Built-in webcams collect all the light points with surveillance software sending live images of its dynamic constellation into the building as well as onto the city's own website. So in short, he's a remarkably talented architect who also traffics in new materials, new technologies, and new means of communicating, and he somehow manages to move seamlessly and effortlessly across them all. My memory is a bit foggy, which is entirely appropriate for introducing someone who started out doing installations at the intersection of art and architecture that included, for example, working with heat-sensitive paint and other surfaces that would reveal traces of bodies that touched it. He had a show in a New York gallery, for example, that used heat-sensitive paint so that exhibition goers could quite literally participate in the display. He's even designed heat-sensitive bed sheets that reveal traces of the body or bodies within. In any case, I'm a little bit foggy as to when exactly we met. I think it was when he was teaching a studio at the GSD on weather, which is a topic that he's been focused on for a long time. That also was around the time when he went from being Jürgen Meyer-Hermann to Jürgen Meyer-H. Now, Jürgen Meyer-Hermann was already a construction because he took his middle name and he moved it to after his last name, claiming that there were already too many architects in Germany with the last name of Meyer, which is true. To then shift Jürgen Meyer-Hermann to Jürgen Meyer-H it makes the name at once more specific, but also more mysterious. This combination of precision and mystery, I'd argue, characterizes his practice as well as his research. Jürgen has taught at Harvard, Princeton, Columbia, the AA, University of Toronto, and in Berlin. His recent publication, Arium, Weather and Architecture, which was co-authored with our own Neeraj Bhatia, and I want to thank Neeraj for bringing Jürgen here for this lecture, it comes out of one of those studios. So the book comes out of one of those studios and offers models of how architecture can intervene with the weather. We deliberately brought him here before the humidity got really bad in the hopes that he can work with us to eliminate that problem forever. Welcome to Houston.
Okay, I push the button. Does it work? Yeah. Huh?
If you don't need the light, you can turn it off.
I think for now it's okay. Thanks so much for the introduction, and it's really a great pleasure to be here. And it was a surprise to have many of my friends now being in Houston. Ron gave the first introduction actually when I had a lecture at the GSD in 2000 or 1990. So it's more than a decade now that we know each other. And it's also great to have Niraj here. We taught 3 years ago in Toronto. And so it's kind of a little family gathering somehow. I'm showing work tonight which is about the happy side, I like to say, of 13 years of architecture production. There's of course all these competitions and this work that seems to be dead ends, or there might still be dead ends here, but that is kind of produced to maybe push something else to the foreground. I'm showing today what is actually on the visible side of the work in our office, and I think the team itself is maybe the biggest, or the construction I'm most proud of. It's about 20 people now working together. It still has kind of a family feeling to it. It's a system, or let's say, or it's a group of people who work intensely with each other. They jump in when something kind of needs to be done. So to make things short, I think that the office itself is actually the project I'm most proud of. So what you see is basically the effects of that constellation. I called the lecture Installation to Nation because we seem to witness now, or by looking back, it seems to be a transition from a lot of installation work or testing in smaller scale, which is about communication and architecture and our body in relationship to technology, that now jumps into constructing actually a whole nation, which I'm showing you later, which is Georgia on the Black Sea. But before I go there and you see kind of the variety of projects that happen to kind of change the image or change the form of that country in a certain way, I give you an introduction where a certain passion or obsession comes from that leads us in our architectural design decisions. These are data protection patterns that I'm collecting for about 16 years now. It's quite easy as a selection or collection material because it comes to your office every day for free, basically, with mail. So you basically just have to open the envelopes and see if it fits in your collection or not. There's a whole variety of these things. They come on shipping slips, they come on inside of envelopes, they come on pin codes and multiple forms. And my research was not really successful. Again, blurriness is part of it. The pattern somehow concealed or kind of camouflaged its own history. It was about 1913, the oldest source I found, where a printer in Berlin offered lead stamps with these patterns in their catalog. And my assumption is that with the advent of carbon paper and typewriters, you could write original and copy or invoice and shipping slip at the same time. So this efficiency in writing data or writing, administrational stuff produced certain errors that had to be blocked out. So the patterns, when you write into these patterns, they erase or camouflage information, or let's say the value of an object or maybe the address. So I'm sure you have seen them all before. We have about maybe 400 different patterns now, and they become somehow a primordial soup of our work. But it also shows kind of a starting point for an obsession with the surface or a white piece of paper as the beginning of any kind of architectural move. As a writer has to kind of tell a story, tell a certain argument, wants to contribute to kind of a narrative in our culture. Architecture, I think, does the same thing. By doing this work and looking closer into these patterns as maybe the last moment that's still visible for us to understand how data control and information handling works before it all moves into the virtual world, I wanted to say that architecture for us is something that's not so much of a background for everyday life, but it should be something that's actually an activator or starts to challenge our understanding how we use space or how we develop certain occupation patterns of our buildings. We also want to expand, if that's possible, the discipline of architecture, like where do we stop, where do we get involved, but it's the virtual world for us that we also start to construct. Is social media already part of an understanding of public space that we also need to understand what it does for architecture, how architects can be involved in these areas. What are the material qualities of architecture? And it also means that new technology, new media, virtual worlds, and smart materials have to become part of the medium that we are using as architects. And in the end, that's what I was saying earlier, from small scale to large scale, from installation work where we test something that's maybe more in an art world or design world, all the way to urban interventions, it's always kind of a slippage from one to the other, and we have to be kind of aware that this is what architects are trained to do, because it's about the formulation of our built environment on a very close one-to-one relationship as much as in an urban larger context. So these patterns are one example of a surface obsession, a question about the surface as a starting point that deals with issues of what is the structure of a surface, what is behind and in front of a surface, what is the information value of surfaces, what are the haptic and sensorial qualities of surfaces, what is before and after a surface. And all these questions then start to slowly become kind of crystallized in a three-dimensional articulation of exactly that one thin layer of, let's say, an overlay of numbers and letters of graphic patterns. You see sometimes numbers, you see sometimes logos of companies all arrayed to create this kind of graphic camouflaging technique. So here are first steps how on this wallpaper, for example, the structure get enlarged and become this transition space to walk through. It becomes shingled, start to become three-dimensionalized. The wall already starts to peel off. All this work we call pretext Vorwand. Vorwand is the translation of pretext into German, but pre-text, pre-writing, and Vorwand is pre-wall. It's kind of an interesting shift from writing to architecture, from writing to kind of a spatial condition. So these were early conditions or early tests how this pattern also could camouflage certain architectural elements. In this case, it was the new museum still on Broadway. And you see how this pattern then starts to camouflage even architectural elements. You see numbers, again, as I mentioned before, patterns, quite kind of op-art qualities, camouflage patterns. They're all found patterns. American Express logos, AT&T, you know that one. Quite kind of free graphics. This is a bank in Holland, for example. This one is also a bank, I think, a Citibank in the States. You have Jasper Johns like cross-hatchings, more organic versions as well. Now, it's becoming more of a primordial soup, or like a starting kind of a humus, a ground, a foundation where certain architectural articulations stem from. These then, of course, have more to do with a programmatic idea, or let's say the context or a certain, let's say, theme topic that goes with a project. In this case here, it's an exhibition actually for Autostadt, which is the themed city by Volkswagen outside of Berlin, about an hour away. It's an exhibition on sustainability / mobility / Volkswagen. Volkswagen or Autostadt wants to introduce this topic as an exhibition that teaches or informs people on these issues, how we behave, how we consume, how we discuss sustainability. It also shows in a certain way where our state of concern is at this point. It means in a way that things we know today about sustainable consumption or sustainable production might be completely overturned tomorrow, because it depends which lobby has power to spread certain information. It depends on what technology is available to us. So in a way, we are in a situation of uncertainty. We all have to decide for ourselves what is the right way how to consume, how to produce, how to act sustainable, if that's an issue. And if you think about how this topic moved from being kind of a counterculture or like an anti-economic argument in the 70s to now basically being a green bubble already, we see what the drive is behind this whole thing. The starting point for our design was this recycling triangle, from PET bottles. And we basically argued that this simplistic idea of recycling is it's kind of an old version to look at an idea of sustainability. This question of uncertainty, dead ends, a more complex interconnectivity between certain issues, create a network or, let's say, a dependency of strategies that cannot be represented in the simplistic triangle anymore. So it became a space that's somehow even like an artificial forest at the same time, which should represent the idea of these different networks and connectivities. And we worked together with Art & Com, which is a multimedia agency in Berlin that worked on all the contents on these stations or on these displays, but everything was embedded in this three-dimensional green structure. So you have sort of interviews, you have sensorial questions about warmth and warming, earth warming, global warming. You have places where you can test your carbon footprint and so forth. The question was also how to make a space that works more, let's say, on an atmospheric or emotional level, because it's about 3,000 people walking through the space. So it has to work for people who just basically walk through and have a short attention span, but at the same time, it also had to work for somebody who is like super interested and wants to go very deep into certain issues. And the advantage of these stations is that the information can always be updated to the current state of the art and knowledge condition that we have about sustainability. And even like 2 weeks after we opened it, they already started to renew certain stations or certain information panels. On a larger scale, and this is an earlier building actually, this idea of an artificial forest or a structure that becomes enlarged to walk into was realized for a dining hall for the University of Karlsruhe. It's a dining hall that also works as a student center. We didn't really have student centers in German campuses until maybe 10 years ago. So it's a new form also for like a social networking or communication platform within a university. So they closed down 3 small dining halls to build one bigger one that's more efficient, it's more, it's more productive, but also it brings together students from different disciplines. So this one here is for music and art students, technology students, mathematics students, and pedagogy students, teachers, and so forth. The situation or the location is at the intersection between the city, which is at the south, and a forest on the north. So the building kind of plays on this ambivalence, being a building or being kind of a forest. But what was important for the design phase in the competition was the relationship between the floor and the ceiling, and how we had to remain flexible. Even after you win a competition, the program will change and will continue. How we can remain that elastic quality and then freeze the relationship between the floor and the ceiling at a certain point. So this was more of a study, or let's say more of a reading device, how to look at the building that we proposed. So where it's more condensed, where you have all the technical rooms, it gets like thicker and more kind of closed. Where it opens up, where we have the public areas, it becomes more of a skeleton or kind of a thinner structural solution. So this then got architecturalized in that way that we have this skeleton that really thickens towards the kitchen areas, and it opens up towards the dining areas. What you see here is a building that works exactly on this kind of perforation quality of inside and outside of a structure that actually houses also program. All the technical things like the light, the ventilation is part of that kind of structure and skeleton. So we try to embed all these elements within this overall design strategy of these structures. We have also a continuation idea of surfaces that you see in a lot of projects, where the floor becomes, the wall or the structure and the ceiling, so it actually wraps you and develops an all-inclusive or like a three-dimensional environment. The problem we had after winning this competition, which is of course a nice problem to have, is how to build this project with the budget that was available for us. We only had about 1,700 euros per square meter, which included all the technical equipment for the kitchen as well. So we had to find a quite intelligent way to build a building that's not just a box with windows, as usually this budget is kind of calculated for. It took us about 2-3 months, and Andre Sander in the office was researching, very hard to find the possible ways how to build it. So in the end, it became a wood building, a timber construction with a polyurethane coating. And although I don't like to say this in lectures, but the budget reduction or the budget problem was actually forcing us to be really innovative, and it became now a prototype for sustainable construction in Germany. So this new timber, which is this laminated wood, it's like layers of either 1 millimeter or 1 centimeter thick layers of wood, highly compressed, comes in sheets of 2 meters by 40 meters, and you can cut out any shape that you like. In this case, also because of efficiency reasons, it was quite strict, and then has all these fillers in. In the civil project later on, we see more of a free shape cutout process. That makes it easy to construct very quickly. It can be prefabricated right on site. It already has like all the insulation issues built in. Also, the wood itself is a good material for that. And then it's sprayed on with a 3 millimeter polyurethane coating that makes it weather protected. It's diffusion open still, so actually the water, or if there's humidity in the wood, it can come out, but also it seals the building in a very precise way. What's nice about this kind of spray-on is that it erases all other issues like metal flashing or, let's say, a change of materials. I have a pointer here. But for example, this part where it rains on should be something else than the vertical part, but we don't have metal flashing up here. And quite often when we show or publish projects, comments are, yeah, it's a nice rendering, but let's see how it's built how it looks when it's built. And I think that's because certain parts that we would expect in a building, we try to erase or ignore, not ignore, but we try to detail so they're not there. And therefore there's a certain abstract quality to the projects we're doing that actually make this rendering issue. Little sidestep. That's just something I'm starting to think about now is when I went to school, this was in the early 90s, well, I finished in the mid 90s, but it was basically the time renderings just became kind of possible. There was no texture mapping or anything. We were happy to have a three-dimensional thing on the screen. And there was a certain boldness about them because we just couldn't be so detailed at that time. And in a way, I start to think that maybe this kind of training of like what we see three-dimensionally might be an aesthetic quality that is still like in our mind, in let's say my generation or our generation, where a kind of a certain boldness or a certain detailedness is becoming part of a vision of architecture. It's brainstorming while I'm speaking, but I think there's something there that could be explored. So you see this also in other projects where you think, oh, this has a rendering quality, but it's always about this kind of trying to erase what we would assume are not normal details in buildings. These patterns also then, or these kind of data protection patterns, come in, let's say, smaller envelopes or in smaller kind of entities. In this case, it's a mailbox in a public building at the town hall that Sarah mentioned earlier. It also comes as kind of camouflage patterns on the floor for like protect stain or like camouflaging stains on the floor. In this case, also it was in a town hall where it's about data handling of its citizens. So it was kind of a metaphor because it became the platform for this data handling of the information and data of citizens. Also in bed sheets, in this case, in combination with temperature-sensitive paint, where the temperature shadow of your body basically follows you and erases the ornament, or let's say the pattern, and brings the whiteness of the sheet to the foreground. But it's only a temporary moment where it constantly follows the movement of the warm body through the bed. The other surface obsession is temperature-sensitive paint and traces that you would leave through changes in atmosphere, climate, temperature, warmth. We started a lot with like art installation or furniture pieces where you would leave a temporary trace of your body kind of by coincidence. The quality of this paint is quite nice because it looks like normal paint, so it doesn't look like something special. We only see the effect after you're in touch with these surfaces. This one was a show at Henry Urban Architecture Gallery in, I think, '96 in New York. It was called In Heat, and it was a reference to an exhibition by Friedrich Kiesler, which was called Blood Flames from 1947 in the Hugo Gallery in New York, where he showed surrealist work that you can only look at because when you, as a visitor, were in kind of in a certain action mode. So there were like paintings that had a wood plank in front of them, and you would have to tear a rope, and it would open up, and you could look at the painting. So there was a kind of an interactivity between the visitor and the artwork, and everything was put together by this huge, super graphic black bubble graphic that was on the floor, on the wall, and up on the ceiling. So in a certain way, this was a reference to that exhibition, and again, the visitor only would see something if he would be in interaction with the work. In this case, sitting down or leaning against the wall, putting its face on the wall, like, rolling it, and therefore leaving a momentary portrait of his face, her face. In a larger version, this was for the Mitra Museum in Weil am Rhein, where we actually took the cafeteria and moved it into the gallery space. We had built-in hot wires, so there was also a temporary ornament or line drawing that would appear and disappear according to its heating up and cooling off. We would see it a little bit up here and in seating elements and up here. I shared the room with Greg Lynn, so what you see here is like Greg Lynn's part. It was all about robotics. The first and maybe most successful one was Heat Seat. You see here basically this kind of playful furniture that also at the same time can be quite kind of aggressive or revealing. The whole idea which you see with the data protection pattern as much as with the temperature sensitive paint, it's all about bringing to foreground or camouflaging or hiding information. It's kind of a communication device that you with your body or with your kind of data are doing with your context and environment. A third version of surface quality, in this case it's not a new material becoming kind of architecturalized. It's an old material, glass mosaics, that we used for furniture we did with Pisazza. In this case, it's actually glass mosaic that's put on polyurethane foam. So when you sit on it, it's actually quite elastic and soft. So we have a surprise factor where the softness, is not expected and welcomes you to sit down. Also, the linoleum that we did here for a lounge in Berlin for the UIA Architecture Congress in 2001 was kind of an old material rethought or reutilized, in this case, as a blurring element from floor to seating element to projection and so forth. This looks pretty old now, 10 years later, but what's interesting for me to show is that when you have smaller scale installations and spaces, you can explore certain conceptual ideas that then jump into a larger scale maybe a couple of years later. Here you see some of the ideas how a landscape, a programmatic landscape, then starts to articulate a little bit like Little Prince, where the snake eats the elephant. It kind of, then creates a different landscape. So all the program, the computers, the storage areas, is all kind of sucked into that kind of surface, that starting point, and therefore it swells up and creates a landscape. So when it jumps to a larger scale, it might become a building. In this case, it's an exhibition center for Danfoss Universe. It's a science park in Denmark, where similar to the installation I showed you before, it's kind of a strip that's pushed from both sides and therefore creating a volume for exhibitions on science. It's a whole kind of outdoor science park that brings young people and kids in touch with technology, natural forces. In this case, the exhibition opened with, the building opened with the first exhibition called Bitlands. So it brought digital culture to, young people. And what was the beauty of this kind of strategy was that all these kind of, basically they just needed a black box. But with these kind of extra pockets, you could hide all the technical equipment that needs to go in a building like this. So ventilation, certain heating systems, they all kind of happen to be in these boxes and or in these pockets. And these overhangs, we were planning to have them as kind of display areas. So since there was no transparency needed for the buildings, we wanted to bring some of the content from the inside to the outside in case they would have a Formula One car race, exhibition inside. They could have a projection here, or like put a silhouette of a car out here, or maybe fragments of a body of a chassis. They didn't use it at that time. I don't know if they still did not do it, but it has potential for it. Inside you have an auditorium. This is from the main first exhibition, where the two long walls actually became projection walls. At the same time, they contained also the beamers. Some plans with that. That's quite simple. You see these extra pockets here, that are filled with technical stuff now. And there's a small restaurant that sits next to it. But a couple of years later, this was maybe half a year ago, we found on the internet actually a picture where they misused it, and I'm quite happy that this happened. We were actually beginning to think about this as kind of areas where you could lay down or can skateboard, because kids would actually drive around with like small bikes. This is outside, you see the fence. This is the fence inside, this is outside. But everything that's higher than 50 centimeters in Denmark needs a railing, so we couldn't really do it, so we had to make a landscape out of it. But I'm glad that legally people actually use it as we were thinking it could be used. This is the town hall that Sarah mentioned earlier. It's the first building that's basically the foundation of the office. It's a competition we won in 1998 for a multi-purpose civic building, town hall, on a former American military base. In 92, Nellingen barracks were given up, and this whole site was becoming part of a city that was actually 4 communities around that military site. So the city actually contains now 5 smaller cities. They each have parts of the city town hall, parts of the city gallery, parts of evening classes, libraries, and so forth. So that building had to bring in everything into one building. So it's a quite complex mix of programs. You have this overhang, which then becomes the entry part to the building. The rain that Sarah mentioned earlier, which actually keep the rain coming onto the building and have it kind of as a kind of a square fountain constantly running down from the building as kind of a new curtain facade, and therefore evaporating into the kind of atmosphere of the public square in front of it, and therefore it creates kind of a microclimate at the same time. The noise, or let's say the acoustic pattern, also helps to kind of activate the space. We have a couple of hitter patterns, how we call them. It's computer-controlled magnet ventals that can have like small drippings. You could have like a big storm. You can have like a splash that's kind of working in certain rhythms. So it actually becomes kind of an indicator also of the program that happens inside. This is the interior with all these kind of communication corridors. This is the central staircase, and again you see how all the elements are pushed into the architectural elements. The light is part of the stair. There are no objects kind of extra to what you see as architectural elements. This is a stair down to the exhibition gallery. I'm showing you now a couple of projects just to give you a feeling, how we kind of explore now in different directions these early kind of studies and searches of our work, and then I'll focus on 2 main projects at the end. So this is a building, or actually 4 buildings that we began constructing about 4 months ago. It's in the center of Jena. That's the city where they produce Zeiss optical lenses, and it's about 2 hours south of Berlin. You have the main square in the town hall. This is the second oldest building, which is a restaurant and an old hotel. And then this is the constellation, the group of these 4 buildings. it's housing and a market. Then we are building right now a courthouse in Hasselt together with 2 architects from that town. It's in Belgium. It's A2O Architects in Bart Lens. It's the architecture on an urban planning scheme by Rest 8, which we won the architectural parts in a competition a couple of years ago, maybe 5-6 years. And this is the first building now on this new master plan. You have the tower with the offices. On the right side you have the main courtrooms, and on the left side you have the library of the university. And that's pretty far up already. That should be done in like June, July this year. That's quite a monster. It's pretty high, it's like 18 stories high. For us, it's the first kind of high-rise project that we're doing. You see some of the elements, I don't know if, you know, this is like, we don't really have air conditioning much in Europe yet. It's coming more and more. In this case, we have these double facades that actually try to keep the building quite low-tech when it comes to climatic control. So these extra facades, these shading devices in front of the main facade, work as these buffer zones for temperature reasons. This is a dentist office in Hamburg, where you see this is the building has this kind of curved entity here. It actually looks like a mouth with teeth. So you have programmatic cores, and then all the treatment rooms are actually open in between these cores. So that's the view inside. And when you look up and have your mouth open, that's what you would see. This is an office building in Hamburg. We finished about 2 years ago. It's mediating between an old building from the 30s here, or even like earlier. This I think is from the 1914, and it's like a little later. And so we had to actually mediate between these two. With a very thick ceramic tile, we also kind of managed to anchor the building or give it a certain weight that this oldest part of Hamburg has. But what's interesting about this building, it's the smallest facade in the city. It's 1 meter 60, 80. You actually can touch both neighboring buildings. It's because here there was a little canal, and the storage building that was here had a little kind of crane to bring in things. The storage is, the canal is gone, but the building site was kind of developed from that squeezed condition. There's a reference to this kind of crane moment with the upper meeting room. Here would be the old canal. You see the building here. This is the smallest facade in Hamburg. And it's very close to the old harbor city. You see the ceramic tiles here. And on the other side. Inside it becomes a very kind of light, white building where there's maybe maritime quality of the building translates in all different floors. This is the space before they moved in. They're just moving in now. It was kind of open for a year. And here, even details like this, where you have the facade material running all the way underneath the entrance, shows you that the moment when you walk into the building, you actually step into the facade, you step into the building. And so I think details like this are becoming quite crucial when you design it. This is a building we're doing now in Berlin. It's our first project. It's a housing project on Johannesstraße. Berlin has all these really deep courtyards and kind of closed blocks. So we wanted to bring the landscape idea of these courtyards, which can be quite nice and has all these big trees, into the building itself and into the facade. So this is the facade you just saw. This building is going to come at some point, and there's always this condition of like a front house and a side wing. That's very kind of Berlin, typical Berlin. We brought the landscaping or the green part in like terraces and balconies up onto the building, into the house itself, and then back into the front facade. It's all these lamellas that become this kind of soft buffer between inside and outside, and we started using these lamellas as discretion devices. When you look from an angle, you cannot see into the buildings. They're all completely glass, but when you look straight, you have still the view and the openness of the apartment. Then each apartment has this kind of sunken areas, these little dips that become kind of homey, cozy living room conditions. And again, this idea of the landscape is brought into the sectional quality of the building. So what you see from the building, the apartment on top, the little dip comes into your apartment, and you basically would have this imprint on the apartment below you. Back in Hamburg, again, an office building that we finished maybe 5 years ago. It's a test how much you can do with a generic office building, basically. It's a floor plan that has to be flexible. There's this 50 centimeters of skin that maybe remains your area of intervention or exploration of this extra space that you can do with an office building. It's a very nice location. Here, up behind the trees, we have the inner lake of Hamburg, and that's a quite specific quality where the whole city actually wraps around interior in an inner kind of lake condition. You see it here. This is the lake. There's a quite heavy traffic intersection. There's a green park area that's actually public, and this is our site. So what you saw was a photo of this condition here. The client offered the city to rebuild or actually redo the public area, and therefore he was allowed to build a little bit more square footage. So it's actually also again a negotiation between a public-private investment that's happening here. But what is really kind of the potential we saw in this building is the view, and therefore creating with a specific eye conditions a certain quality for the office building. You could step into the facade, have a fresh air moment. It's quite windy, but it's nice to be outside in Hamburg. So we had these kind of balconies, but all in glass. So you have a glass area out here, but it's kind of naturally ventilated. This idea of these eyes then comes into the structure of the building. We have these prefab concrete ceilings that take this relief quality of the facade into the structural system. And we have these separation elements also. It goes even into the design of the interiors. In this case, we also did the furniture. We were lucky that there was an advertising company moving in, so they wanted us to kind of continue with our design idea all the way to the material selection even of furnitures and carpets and so forth. You would have the lake behind here. Staircase. Even here, the kind of the circular mosaics become part of that relief idea of like little kind of jumps up and down, and therefore like a textile quality that goes with already the starting point of the facade as this little shift of moving out and inside of that layer where the building stops. And then this is the side from the water. You would have these eyes. Each rental unit in the building has one of these kind of eyes or kind of winter gardens. And then if they would create a special moment in the building where you could have a meeting room or like a communal area, a lobby, and only these two cores would be defined for the restaurants. Here you see the interconnection between the park or the green area and the building. And as much as these eyes become these moments of attention in the generic floor plan, you would have the same in the garden where they could become kind of picnic areas for lunch breaks. And when you're inside the building, you look outside, that's what you see, kind of a reflection of your building in the green. Much more complex in its kind of organization, but actually quite close to the design strategy of the dining hall. The first building I showed you, the green kind of artificial forest building. This is Duplicasa. It's a house for a family that lives outside of Stuttgart. They built a house in '84, and with every kid and more money, there was extensions, and it became quite of a confused agglomeration of a building. It was conceptually interesting, but it was a little bit like too confusing maybe. So the client asked us to rethink the idea of their house and mentioned at the same time that there was a certain kind of emotional factor, of course, attached to their house because that's how the family was founded and that's where they lived for so many years. So this is the house that was there before. you see the original house, kind of a fan structure. It was a Sharon, somebody who worked in Sharon's office who then went on its own. And you see kind of a fan structure, but this part was added later, this part was added later. A balcony became a window garden, became a room. The pool was, then covered and extended. So the Tadawano's garage came at some point. So it was just an accumulation of things. It was a catalog of materials in fashion in the last 25 years. So you had like areas with, matte gray granite, and then some parts with white marble, and some parts with like beige travertine. I mean, basically just as it came. So he said, we don't really like the house anymore, but we still feel emotionally attached to it. What can we do? And I think while we talked, I told him there's a potential of using a kind of a strategy that I then called family archaeology. We had to keep a lot of the foundations in the ground because there was so much concrete, but we kept the footprint of the old building. We duplicated it and rotated it up, so the new building kind of moves out or rotates out of the old geometry. And the space in between the public layer of this private house then had to mediate between these two layers. So the lower floor is for the children and the pool, and the upper floor is for the parents and guests, and in between you have this kind of public layer of a house. And that's what was then helping them to understand, or actually we were the fourth architects they asked to design something, and it was somehow working for them. Usually the client, he builds a lot, he's in the real estate business, and usually they like, he likes like very square kind of Swiss boxes and everything is gray and kind of reduced and controlled. But it made sense to do it like that, and it just like made conceptual sense for us. So he told us we have a month to design something and come back. So when we opened the box and put up the model, I saw their face and they were like, oh, it looked like it's not going to fly. So I was like, okay, it was a try, but I explained it for them for an hour. And it was, I've never seen this before, like their faces really changed within that hour from like being completely like, what is this alien sitting here, this model, to in the end she said in her like Swabian dialect, but that's how I draw it, that's how I do it all the time anyway. So it really kind of completely changed the attitude towards this project, and that's when the whole drama started. But we finished it, and so this is what we see now. It's a building that actually has kind of a horizontal symmetry built into it. Everything from here, from that edge up, is kind of mirrored to down here. It's folded. It has this continuous white surface that melts and anchors the building back into the ground. When I mentioned earlier that this kind of skin condition that wraps and melts from like one dimension to the other, this is an extreme version of that. What looks as one continuous surface actually is the construction of many different materials. We have polyurethane coating here on wood, then it becomes kind of a porous concrete with glass fiber and stucco on it. These areas are polyurethane again on different materials. Then it comes down with stucco and it wraps around and becomes a tartan rubber floor. So let's say the ignorance in designing, or let's say not naivety, but like the ignorance when we design and thinking about materials then forces us later to be highly innovative with engineers, with the companies, to find the right way to develop and realize these things. And again, you have this kind of abstract quality to it where everything actually is pushed behind that white coating that makes the building then work also. So some photos from the site. This actually is existing, all these kind of stone walls, and the pool was existing. We just wrapped into different materials. Down here is more or less like the division line of this is existing walls, and then of course the starting point was the original geometry, but then each room and each dimension got discussed, and the kids wanted to have more space here, less space there. So it became then kind of negotiated from all different points of view. The main room, the main floor, has the central atrium with 4 pocket spaces: entrance, living room, library, eating, show kitchen, cooking kitchen. and then the upper floor, which is the private floor. Again, the symmetry condition with these distances kind of mirroring around that line. And all these overhangs basically come from rotating the original geometry out into a new position. And some interior views. We only saw the building a week before they moved in, so the furniture, there was some furniture was there already. So I don't really know how they occupied and how they live in there now, but some furniture actually help us now in the photographs to see the dimensions of the space. Across from the valley here you would have the German Literature Archive, and I'm sure all of you know David Chipperfield's extension. He got the Sterling Prize for building. That's basically sitting here. The pool and the main lobby with the living room, and this is the entrance area. And the view again, how it melts down the site. Before I come to Metropole Parasol, maybe the most complex project we did so far, I want to jump to a nation first. We moved from installations to buildings to then an urban structure in a second. This is a new project called Georgia, and we are participating with a lot of infrastructural projects that we get permission from the government. I got a call about 2 years ago out of the blue where they said they saw the Seville project, which I'm showing in a second, and they would be interested in talking to me about projects. So we made a lot of designs for all kinds of projects. I think maybe 30 different designs. About 10 now became real projects, 10 to 12 projects. And these are the locations for them. Georgia, this is the Black Sea, Russia, Turkey, Armenia, Azerbaijan. Georgia is a very small country. It has the size of Bavaria. I don't know how that translates into United States. 3.5 million, so it's really kind of a tiny country. It was the Silk Road that went actually through Tbilisi from the east to Asia. And it doesn't really have much own industry. It's a really rich industrial, agricultural country that produced all the wine and food for Russia. That market is gone now. So they have to also reach out now to other markets. The oldest wine plant in the world supposedly is in Georgia, and the word wine, they say, also comes from Georgian language. So it's a wine country. But also now becomes highly modernized. They're building the first highway now through the country. Now it takes from Tbilisi to Batumi, it takes about 5.5 hours. Later with the highway it will take maybe 2.5. Batumi becomes now a kind of tourist hotspot for Georgia. The beautiful part was up here, Abkhazia, that's now not part of Georgia anymore. So they have to develop a new kind of tourist industry also here. And that works really well because all countries around are mostly Muslim countries. So this is an Orthodox country. You can have alcohol, girls, money, gambling, and so forth. So actually it makes sense to fly here to Georgia rather than like another 3 hours to Italy or France. So I mean, they kind of develop a whole new market in Georgia. The buildings we are working on now are all these red spots. We just opened up a little airport in Mestia, which is up in the Caucasian Mountains, a World UNESCO Heritage Site, which will be developed into now also a tourist area and maybe even a skiing area. We're doing rest stops along the highway. We are working right now on building the border station between Georgia and Turkey. We're working on a train station here. We have pavilions, kind of cafe clubs in Batumi. So it's basically infrastructural projects, sometimes commissioned by the government, sometimes then commissioned or asked to be commissioned by oil companies. So I'm showing you these projects. I'm still wondering why it works so well, or why our architecture seems to be so welcomed in this country. But there's a certain, let's say, joy and like in sculptural qualities, or in, let's say, there's a certain kind of expressiveness in the country that maybe seems to resonate with the work that we're doing. This is a sculpture in a cafe in Batumi under construction. They started constructing it from our A3 renderings without telling us. That was a surprise about half a year later. They're better now. But I mean, it still looks good, so it's a surprise. It's a different way to collaborate. And they even made a facade that's not from us, which was inspired by our work. So maybe the idea of being copied is an honor. The president said, "Oh, it's like a fake Rolex." I said, "Yeah, it's like a fake Rolex." This is Batumi, really beautiful. We made a high-rise design for the campus that's not commissioned at this point. You see the new Sheraton Hotel that opened just about half a year ago. They will build five-star plus hotels now just in this area here. It's a Kempinski, Hyatt, whatever, Hilton, and so forth. So this is a design we worked on, but at this point it's on hold. This is a cafe we just got commissioned. It's on the new coast. Actually, let me jump back. They built the whole coastline here becomes this huge boulevard for basically summer tourism. So it's kind of a club, a Buddha club, whatever they want to do there. This is the border station between Georgia and Turkey. Which country cares about how their border stations look like? This is Georgia, this is Turkey, this is the Black Sea. That part already is built. They're working now on the tower. And the tower also will be for surveillance, of course, or to check what's going on, but it also will be partly public with terraces where people actually can look onto landscape in the Black Sea, even when they have to wait. They have cafeterias and a shopping area. This is the entrance when you come from Turkey. You would get off the bus and have to walk in through the checkpoints. This is a small airport that opened before Christmas. We got a call, I remember, on August 24th, saying we need an airport design tomorrow. I said, okay. So we gave it to them a day later. 3 months later, it was built. Here you have the towers of this beautiful town, Mestia. It's this UNESCO World Heritage Site. So it's this kind of protecting. I mean, when this kind of warrior troops would, I don't know, I'm missing my English right now, when these kind of enemy troops would run through that area, they would actually move up onto the towers, take up the ladder and wait until everybody's gone and then come down again. It was kind of a little escape tower, and then of course they could shoot down from there. So it's actually quite of a magic landscape. This is a guest house we got commissioned about 3 weeks ago, also for the government in that part of Georgia. So it has 3 levels of apartments, or let's say actually 1 apartment and then a dining room on top. This is a civic center, with a wedding room and some town hall office functions. That's also a new commission we got last month. Inside, same country. Same city. This one here are the rest stops. They will build 18 of these rest stops along the new highway. And they're already building the rest stops now, even if there is no highway yet. I mean, the highway is in process. I mean, they're building it. But what's quite incredible is that these rest stops are built with a supermarket, of course, and some kind of cultural exhibition space. So the little villages or the cities around these rest stops already see something is happening. They already have a new place to go. So it's not only for the highway, but it's also kind of a regional activating program. What's pretty smart in developing the country is that, for example, the parliament not only has Tbilisi as the place to meet, but every time they have to meet in different cities. So they have to build all this parliament, or let's say conference buildings across the country. So he uses the meeting of the parliament, or the government uses the meeting of the parliament also to introduce new infrastructure, new buildings in the whole country. So it's a completely different way to think about developing and establishing basically a country from scratch. Everybody in the government is from 35 to 45. They work 24 hours. When you meet with them, everybody's constantly on the phone. Even when I send emails, I get emails back at 1 o'clock at night. I mean, it's pretty incredible. Anyway, this is the construction site of one of the rest stops. Okay, now back to city and urbanism. Metropole Power Zone. This is a competition we won in 2004, and it was a competition that was declared as an ideas competition, not necessarily as a build or realization competition. The site is in the very center of Seville. It's the largest medieval downtown in Europe. That's what they say. And it's also at the intersection of a very well-developed southern part, which has the town hall and the city hall, the town hall, the shopping, the cathedral, the parks, the palace, and the bullfight ring. The northern part was quite underdeveloped. That changed in the last couple of years. But the building, or our structure project, has the function, or had the function, to bridge that development from the southern part into the northern part of Seville. This is a photo montage, but this is a photo. So we are actually very close to finishing it now. It was super complex in terms of negotiating for the city with all different parties involved, the cultural boards, the engineers, the different parties, and also to find a way with the archaeologists and so forth. But the financial crisis also didn't help. That hit Spain quite badly. But the main problem was how to build and construct this power saw. So we are very happy that we are there now, and should be open in about a month or so. It sits here kind of as the central core or heart of Seville, where all the main streets actually run through it. This was a situation for the competition. It was a hole 6 meters deep because they wanted to build a parking garage. After they built the 40-meter deep walls, they took out the earth and found all these Roman ruins, and that's when everything stopped. But this was the situation after 30 years of nothing on that side. The market that happened to be here was taking down the southern part in the 50s and the northern part in the 70s. The city just grew too large, so they had to move the market outside. And then they had to find, or they were trying to find a solution for that central part of the city. It was never really built as a square like Plaza Mayor or Plaza Reals, where you have the walls around the square defining the space. It was always an object that defined that part of Seville. It was a cloister before, a monastery that kind of got enlarged, so it took down more city fabric. Then the monastery was taken down to rip out even more medieval buildings to create this food market, and then that was taken down to create something else. So the facades around the plaza are not facades for a big square. Some of them were like small alley facades, and of course now you have some new buildings as well. This was the market until maybe 1950s. And this was the situation until the 1990s, early 19, maybe late 1980s. It was a temporary parking spot. So the city tried to find a proposal to bring that plaza, that space back into the public realm. And the initial idea was to have a parking garage of just a plaza with a small kind of food market as a pavilion on it, and that's it. But after they found all these ruins, it was clear that it had to become something like an archaeology window into the history of the city, and that they could use this as a chance to think about an urban condition that talks about updating actually Seville into the 21st century. So the hope that came with this project was about kind of the Bilbao effect. How can Seville compete with other Spanish cities on a national level? On a very local level, how does it activate the city itself and the neighborhood? And on an international level, of course, how to attract other business and tourism. The first phase we did kind of from Berlin. At that time we had a waiting period in January, and we jumped on this competition not really thinking that even if we would win at some point, something would happen, because I think it was the third competition on that side. But then the second phase, when we got selected out of, there were 10 projects selected into the second phase, then something became more serious. The first phase was anonymous, and I think that was the intelligence of the project even before the architect came in, that the pressure was not there to find a solution, but it was more like, what's the potential of that space? And then the second phase, when they saw there were some projects that had the support also of the people, and there was kind of a vibe going on, then the city and the mayor in the end decided that this should become a realization competition. So in the second phase, everything was kind of open to the public. There was a website with all drawings from each participant, with all the texts. There was a blog where people could discuss it. So it was also important for us to see what the feedback is from the city. And I think only because of that structure, that system, there was a way to actually have this project built, because everybody felt they could comment on it. There was no kind of alien that appeared after the end of the competition jury. It was already like 2 or 3 months in the discussion at the city. And the city also could see what had the support of the people, and therefore would actually carry through decision-making process in all these different meetings with the city. So in the second phase, we had to go present our project to the other competitors, to the in public lectures, to everybody who was interested. And then we also had to communicate certain ideas of design process that made it understandable also for, let's say, non-architects, what is going on with a project like this. So we found some references that were helpful for us. We didn't know them in the first phase, but in the second phase, when we went to Seville, we saw certain kind of elements that helped us to understand better why it actually worked so well on that site for us, and then how we could explain it to the general public. This is a plaza just 200 meters away with this huge trees, so in a way it's a grown construction that we are proposing with our constructed project. This is the ceiling of the cathedral, so this beautiful undulated, three-dimensional undulated stone roof was another reference for our parasol. And then the inside of this cathedral, where the structure becomes the space-defining element, also was kind of a reference. And the height and the size even of the dimensions of our project was quite similar. So Metropole Parasol, which became this huge kind of shading device, then started to house in different levels other programs underneath. So the competition was quite open. There was only the archaeology that was a given, very selected areas where you could go down with the foundations, and to bring back some food market. Everything else was open to our proposal. So the initial idea we had was actually bringing shade or bringing shadow to the site, because that's the only way you can actually be outside in summer, well, most time of the year. In terms of programmatic display, you have the archaeology down here. On the ground floor you have the food market and some commercial areas. Then the plaza moves up and creates the roof for the food market, but also offers kind of separated public areas. We have with these pockets, the plaza is quite irregular. You have all these kind of extra neighborhood public areas besides the main public square here. Then you have the parasol with a restaurant up here and a panoramic walk with a platform on top. Some drawings for the plans. The archaeology shows you these areas were not allowed to be touched, so our foundations had to go in very selected areas, and that's also how the shape was generated. We developed a certain geometry that looked kind of good for us, that seemed to be strong but still kind of relaxed in that space, and then we had to bring down the loads on very selected points. That's how this kind of parasol mushrooms developed. Then there's archaeology at the ground floor. They bring back now all the kind of walls and mosaics they found. That's now done by an architect from Seville. So it also becomes kind of like a framework for other people doing something. The market was basically designed with the market people. The archaeology downstairs now is done by an architect from Seville. We might hopefully do the restaurant on top, but it's strong enough to have all these other kind of voices come in and articulate the spaces inside that Metropole Parasol structure. The dimensions are quite huge, as you saw in the pictures. It's about 150 meters long, which is times 9, 1,350 feet, I don't know. No? Times 3, sorry, 450 feet. Long, about 250 feet wide, and 6 stories high, like 90 feet high. What you see here, the beige part is, again, this laminated wood with a polyurethane coating. What's darker is a mix of steel and concrete construction because of either fire issues or earthquake issues. But we designed again without knowing which material would be the right one, but we had a certain spatial idea in mind that was important for us. And so by testing concrete with glass fiber, steel, wood with coating, without coating, this kind of technique that we developed with the dining hall always came back as the one being the best solution. And it's not a matter of like liking or disliking. You know, you compare cost development of steel, you compare prefabrication qualities, recyclability, noise production during construction, earthquake behavior, even like heat and coldness, expansion and contraction like from night to day, and fire issues. And this was always the one that seemed to like work best within all these conditions. So we made also studies on what is the shading device, the shading factor for the site. But step by step, we had to find out how to build this thing. First of all, the big problem was it's not a radial structure that takes down the load, you know, to the stems, but it's this orthogonal north-south grid that's confronted with this, you know, amorphic, invisible shape, basically form, and everything inside that shape is built, and everything outside that shape is not built. So that gave us a certain elasticity where we could actually make things larger, smaller, according to its structural needs, or the cultural board of Andalusia said we have to go lower here, but we should be higher here, so it balances better with the silhouette of the city and so forth. So that moment where we moved from like building the skin, which was the first step, the first part in the competition, to actually building the volume inside was quite liberating. Now, that system, of course, enforces us to handle a lot of diagonal forces that run through it, and therefore creates other forms of tension and tension moments in the building. To show you how these are produced, briefly, it's like these huge plates of wood that have these automatic cutouts. But the big innovation for the project now is not so much the wood with the polyurethane coating that we did in the dining hall. It actually becomes the largest, maybe the largest glued structure in the world at this point. It doesn't look like it, but the steel joints have to be connected to the wood plates. And if you would connect them directly here, let's say the contact area is too small to take all that load. The wood would just melt away like butter. So what had to be done was bringing the load that happens to go from the joints into the wood into a larger area. So we have these 1 meter deep long steel rods that actually are glued into the wood. That you couldn't screw them in, that wouldn't work. So it had to be glued into the wood, and that glue only is now on the market for about 2 years. You see here a cross section where you have the wood, all this laminated wood. This is the steel rod, this is the glue around, and then this is the polyurethane coating. The question was, would that glue work in a condition like Seville where it actually gets very hot? So the glue has a performance rate up to 70 degrees, and we had to make tests, you know, what the heating up system or like a situation would be on the steel joints that then, you know, takes the heat, of course, into the steel rods. But only the first 4 centimeters were critical, the rest is okay. But what you can do, and that's what we are doing with these structures now, if you take the whole thing with the glued-in steel rods and details, you can put that into a heat chamber and heat it up to 80 degrees. It's called a tempering process, so actually you move up the heat performance of the glue for another 10 degrees to 80 degrees. So now we should be safe for global warming in the next 100 years. But it doesn't seem to be a problem. So they're produced outside of Stuttgart, outside of Munich. Then they're taken by boats or trucks down to Seville. And then outside of Seville, the polyurethane coating is put on. Then they bring it on site and then put it together. And I'll show you a lot of construction pictures now, step by step here. These are the 2 concrete cores for the elevators up for the restaurant. This is the substructure for the restaurant because of fire issues and earthquake that had to be in steel. Then the stems go up with this vertical laminated wood plates. The moment where it starts to cantilever out, that's when this gluing detail comes in. Some areas still had to be done in like a steel construction that will be covered so it all looks the same. We have these foot points that had to be that worked also as fire protection. So they will again melt the building or the foots, the stems down into the ground, or you could do it the other way. It actually comes down out through the ground. It has to be 5 meter high in steel and concrete to protect the wood from fire in case there's a car standing next to it and if they would burn. Some pictures from the last couple of weeks. It's all kind of filled with this scaffolding that holds up. It's actually the same technique they did in old churches. They have to build up these scaffolds to then build the construction on top, and then they take it down again. You see here one of these floating, fire protection. This will then be filled later with concrete. What's also nice is that, I don't know if you see it here, maybe better later on, that we started to design it all in like one dimension. It's actually, now it ranges between 7 centimeters and 28 centimeters. So according to what forces are running through the pieces, the thickness of the wood plates also change. So it's actually this neutral grid becomes fine-tuned and kind of adjusted by its forces on each side. Some details that show you that it's actually designed in a kind of digital process are these little leftover pieces. Like, for example, here, if you would design it, you wouldn't really do that. But by confronting the grid with this invisible amorph shape, you get all these conflicts or these little kind of leftover pieces. Then there's a walkway. There's a walkway that then comes up here. I'll show you in a second. So you can come out of the restaurant, walk up here all the way to the rooftop. Here you see the steel details. All of these elements then are glued into the wood. So that glue actually holds together the pieces. Now you have the walkways that are sitting on top of this thing. This is kind of what we imagine in the competition with like steel glass railings. Now they had to become more kind of bellied out, so people wouldn't jump over them. That was the big fear. How much does it attract people to jump down or like throw something down? This is then in the part where we have the restaurant. That structure then kind of also becomes a roof. This is kind of the calzone part, but the rest is more like just bowls that are open up. This is the view we simulated from the cafe onto the city. And I like this image a lot because it shows the simultaneity of the different times involved. You have the archaeology downstairs, which always is kind of present. You have the everydayness of the present, which is the food market and kind of the shopping part. And then you go up and have this kind of visionary level of the parasols with the view to the horizon. This might be one of the moments where it really is used as this cultural place that's pulsating in the center of the city. It should become that place where it always gets kind of animated by different programs, or even the light condition could become like especially orchestrated or designed for, let's say, a special holiday or like a Catholic procession that actually runs through it. So in a way, that building or that structure becomes an envelope for public life. It really sits in the center of the city, and I think it's a great gift that the city can give to its citizens. Although with all the risks involved, with all kind of the pressures, it was worth that there was this negotiation going on between, of course, the politicians, but also the people inside the interest groups. It was not an easy process, the archaeology, the market people. The role of an architect also changes quite a lot in that situation. And if you find an architecture that's strong enough, that actually has a certain boldness, that actually can take in all these different interests and these different concerns, then I think architecture has the power to create a place for us to meet and communicate. And I think the last images show you how it all comes down to just an envelope that you get in your mail. Thank you very much.
Reluctantly, we'll take a couple of
starts with a hypothesis that all architecture is didactic. A little less didactic, a little more didactic, but let's say it's all didactic if you start there. And that the choice that we're left with is actually to go in two directions for the moment, just for the sake of the question. One could see didacticism going in two directions. One is toward trying to suggest a relationship to a public outside the discipline, say. And the other one is that we have a tendency to go towards, say, a didacticism about things that are internal to the discipline. What I find actually very interesting in your work, and rare, meaning most architects will go one way or the other, is that you do both. And I wonder if you would comment on that sort of relationship to things, think about, say, the way you're using geometry or the way that you're constructing arguments about architectural systems, and then also constructing things that have to do with the reception of that outside your construction of those parameters in some way. I'm just wondering if you would comment on the relationship between the two.
But one thing is, of course, something that that concerns us, and it's kind of an internal, discipline question, how we learn how, let me start differently. The way we communicate to a client or to a public, of course, sometimes it comes across as a one-line or a limiting, to the way how we read certain projects. But I feel it's necessary to give a certain image or understanding as a starting point, as an entry point for a general public into a project. So when I say the Metropolitan looks like, I don't know, the trees on another plaza or like the roof of the cathedral, it's not meant to explain it in full, but it's actually meant to be an entry point for somebody to understand what's going on. Or similarly to, say, the dining hall is an artificial forest or something like that. I mean, it's not what we thought when we designed it, but it helps in a certain way to argue it and give a certain image, but not to explain it full, because I think it's actually limiting what the reading of a project can do. Within the discipline, it's a little bit different. Then I could talk just about parametric design or say construction methods or material qualities. But when I show the work, I think you're right. It's both. It's a way how we have to communicate certain ideas to the public, without being too diagrammatic or I don't know if didactic is the right word. I think it's more like reaching out and helping to bring people in or into an understanding. But I mentioned this afternoon, the most touching part, and I think that's all we can do as architect, was a year after we won the Seville competition, I got an email from this 17-year-old guy. You heard it before, I think. And he said, hello, I'm Chico, I'm 17 years old, this is my city and this is my future, thank you so much for this project. I mean, what else do you want as an architect?
But there does seem to be an interesting connection between the way you were explaining it as a tree or as an artificial forest and the internal logic in the work. When you said artificial forest, at first I thought, just using it as a metaphor, but then it's made out of wood, right? And you said it was sustainable ordinance. Interesting. It's not just an accident. That there is maybe two levels of reference to the organic, and then the body pain, and the body that changed the pattern, right, when it moved, is also a way that the organic is tied into the pattern directly. And it seems like it's your early work in the exhibition. Maybe it's probably much easier to do it at that level. There's an explicit connection between the organic and the patterns. It's not just the geometry, but it's how it's built in terms of it actually being wood, or how it's used in terms of rolling around the bed, or even the fake waterfall, right? That is referencing nature. And it seems like there's when it's not just geometry, biomorphic forms, when it's not just looks like a tree, right? But it actually engages it on another level, then it really gets to be a lot more interesting. So there is a connection between the organic, there seems to be an interesting connection between the organic metaphors that you're using it to explain to the public and the project itself, which actually carries some of that in it. Yeah,
I agree that the moment where it's on a smaller scale, the direct connection of the body in relationship to an architectural condition or to a surface condition has a certain power that is difficult to achieve in a larger project. But I think it is about a communication that we do with our context. And when we move to larger structures, we might still have to figure out what that communication is that we're doing with a project that's a town hall, or a project that is not even a town hall, maybe it works better, but a courthouse or even a civil project. We're talking to a larger body rather than just like an individual body. And I still see these projects as kind of questions, as tests. I don't think they're like answers. They're more like trying to figure out where a certain idea about an architectural contribution can lie.
Yeah, it just seems interesting that you don't want it to just look like a tree, right? Just be a sign for the natural, for the organic, but that it's encoded in other levels, and not just as. And it seems like
with the courthouse,
yeah, all of them. Someone could say that your forms are organic, right? Which means that it looks like a picture of a tree, or it looks like a picture of something that's organic. But it seems like it's something that it's not just a way to sell it to the public, because we have to grapple with those issues, right? What does it mean? What does it look like? What does it say? And it seems like you're doing it, and I think the fact that the thing in Seville is made out of wood is extremely important, right? If it had been out of concrete or something else, it wouldn't have had that second level of connection to the organic. It would have just been the shade or something. And it seems like it's not just a part of the discussion with the outside, but it's one that we would take on inside as to how it's communicated, what its level of meaning is. And it seems to be really, really potent in your work.
There's a question back there.
The fillet shows up a lot in your work, both in the plan and in
the what?
The fillet, when you fill it up with the corner. Shows up a lot in your work, both in the plan and in elevation. There's a long history of the fillet in the plan, and I was wondering if you could comment a little bit more on how you use the fillet, particularly on like a vertical surface or a vertical frontal connection. Like, is there, for example, is there a connection to other German architects like Jürgen and Mendelssohn?
Well, Mendelssohn was the guy who brought me into architecture. I got a book when I was 15 from my parents about 20th century art and architecture in Stuttgart. And there was a picture of the Mendelssohn, the Schocken department store. I don't know if you know that one. It has this beautiful glass staircase. And this really kind of blew my mind. And I wanted to know more about architecture. So Mendelssohn is, one of the big starting points. The fillets, I would like to call it more of a chamfered corner condition, and a lot of the references that I'm having is in a period where there's an exploration where kind of international architecture became more of which is more of an addition architecture rather to, let's say, a brutalist moment where it's more about a sculpture and a unification of surfaces around corners. So you would have, in plan or in section, these chamfered corners that it's kind of a blob 101 architecture. It actually takes, by technology involvement and digitalization, these chamfers become more and more kind of soft and round. So I think there's a lot that we're doing now that actually is explored in this very kind of brutalist concrete architecture in the 60s and 70s. I'm also surprised that nobody ever wrote about kind of the international success of chamfered corners. I mean, you see it in Boston as much as you see it in China or in Japan or in Germany. And there seems to be an agreement at that time where everybody did chamfered corners, but do you know why? I don't know why. Like something happened. So it's about a continuation of surfaces that talks about maybe an enveloping of space that breaks down the different dimensions, floor, wall, ceiling, where it comes from an idea that it's more of an environment rather than a construction of a space. Can you write about this? I need somebody to talk about this.
I wanted to ask about the relationship between the 2D and the 3D in a way. I mean, you talked about the fact that the buildings, you like the fact that they look like renderings sometimes, but they also look like laser cut models, right? They're really good. And I guess I'm wondering if it seems like in the earlier work, it's a 3D work built up out of 2D planes. I'm wondering if it changes when it gets to the more both to the Georgian work, where it has to sort of register at a countrywide scale, or sort of give an image maybe, sort of consistency to a larger area, or in the Seville project. Is it then the 2D builds up the 3D, but then the 3D goes back to being a 2D image at some point? I guess I'm just wondering about your thought about how that relationship works throughout your practice and whether it's changed.
I think it comes a lot from a graphic understanding of space. And so the 2D actually then becomes maybe a 3D thing. I guess part of let's say, the success that we are able to build out of these things is that they're quite, let's say, easy to build when it comes to 3D, because there's still like a 2D thinking behind it. I think Seville is the most complex, and again, that one has like all these kind of 2D cuts. So I think there's always this kind of shift or this kind of tension between 2D and 3D that you're saying that comes, I think, from graphic thinking, or a graphic understanding.
I mean, I guess I'm wondering if there's certain projects where you want them to be 3D and for the 2D to pop out some way, or are there ones that you want to be read as 2D and then 3D to sort of fall out as a consequence of that?
I like the flipping back and forth of the dimensions, and then the fourth dimension even could be, that they have a time aspect to it. Let's say in temperature, change, or in even a timeshare concept, how the spaces are used. There's like something that I wanted to introduce in a town hall, the first building that you saw, that you mentioned, which of course didn't happen because we still think in territories. The town hall was actually too small for all the different programs that the people wanted. So, the librarians wanted more space, the galleries wanted more space, everybody wanted more space. But there was a budget restriction, of course, and just space restriction. So I said, why not work with adjacencies that actually can be flexible? So when the library is open but the gallery is closed, they could actually extend the reading area into the gallery. If the gallery is open and the library is closed, maybe they can have projections of videos, in the library area and so forth. So there could be a timeshare or like a timeshare issue of program in the building. Of course, it was about security and about protection and about having territories. But if that's possible, that we can actually have buildings that take these boundaries between programs elastic also in terms of how they're used, I think then we can also bring like a 4D aspect into buildings. Oh, that's a nice. Thank you very much.